And we're back with PU Talk number 7. 7 in. Today we're kind of diving into a little bit of, I think we both agreed, a tougher topic to talk about. I don't think it necessarily should be, but I think it's one that we all have a tendency to move away from a little bit. We're talking about pillar number 5, how you connect with yourself. It's a deeper one, but I think a lot of big, important things can come from something like this. But before we get into that, John, any updates on your end with anything going on? I know you're traveling today over to San Diego.
Yeah, so I'll miss out on a week of training as we're approaching the Thanksgiving time frame. I apologize if you hear the tea kettle in the back. Billy's brewing some tea, so get a little bit closer. Outside of that, I think that we are nailing down a date. We should have probably talked about this beforehand, but did we nail down a date? Did you talk to Kevin about nailing down a date for Inflammation Fest?
He just shot me an email, so I was wrong about the first weekend. It's the second weekend, so the 9th is that Friday is the one we talked about.
For the smoke fest.
For the smoke,
Okay.
detox to detox.
Gotcha.
So it looks like the 9th is going to be the date.
So let's you want to confirm that right now
He
on
confirmed
air?
it. Let's confirm it.
The 9th.
Confirm it.
All right.
The 9th it
I
is.
think that's going to be the best one. So Friday night, Inflammation Fest, the Detox to Retox, what we're going to be doing on the 9th of December. Be able to set your calendars and clear your schedules to be able to come down to the facility, work out maybe around 5 o'clock, or just come down and partake in some tasty beverages, some tasty foods, some feasting off of our garden. We're going to smoke some pork, we're going to smoke some salmon, we're going to smoke some chicken, and really be able to celebrate each other a little bit more of a PU style with, I guess, Kevin Linlado's expertise. I'm not really sure that how to smoke anything, but he apparently does some good stuff. So bring your friends, bring your family, bring it, whoever wants. We want to bring this and make this a social event and really be able to dial in on who we are at Performance Unlimited as a community.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. I love it. So we're getting into Pillar 5 today, so how we connect with ourselves. So John, top of mind when you hear that, kind of what were your initial thoughts on the whole pillar in general? Why did it become a pillar, and where did it start?
Well, I think it was the motivation for creating the entire 7 pillars. When we talk about a realization, we all kind of come about within our lives. Maybe some have or have not come to a certain realization, but I think at whatever depth, personally, we all go through these journeys in life where a realization that you've been doing things wrong comes about, and that is essentially what we're talking about today. That connection with yourself has that sort of light bulb moment. I'm not going to go with the adage, the aha moment, but the light bulb moment to where you really need to change things in your life. And that can only come through a specific amount of awareness of that you need to change, but then some intelligence on where you need to change and how you need to go about changing that. So the pillars only came about when I recognized that I needed to make some changes on myself. And again, to go back and to premise everything, the whole pillar philosophy, the whole 7 ideals of what we're talking about is really only a reflection of what I have been thinking about and pondering on and working on in myself. And by no way do I think that this is going to be the specific way that everybody is going to go through their own journey. I do believe that everybody needs to be aware and create some awareness and create some intelligence and create some capacity on each one of these skills. And I do think that your health and happiness does a large part stem on these 7 pillars. But again, this is a story on the way that I came about a realization that I need to make some changes, and the way I constantly and consistently am finding myself going through changes every day. I by no means have it all figured out, but this is my filter, my lens of how I'm going through my connection with myself, my connection with others, my connection with things that ultimately are making me tangibly, quantifiably, and subjectively healthier and happier. This is no denial, this is no make-believe, this is no fairy tale of what I want to happen to make this a marketable approach on some business venture. This is truly a story to help push the mission of what we do every single day by way of movement, by way of gym, by way of fitness, to make people happier through health and therefore through movement, that I think that the industry is going deeper and darker into a chasm because we're only looking at movement. Our metrics are wrong, and we are not opening up the possibilities that there is so much more to master, to think about, to develop skills on, to create drills over, so that we can really, again, achieve that healthiness that we want.
Well, and let me stop you there in the sense that I don't think it's that we've forgotten or don't think that there's other things outside of movement. I think it's that we've neglected the things outside of movement, because I believe that movement is something that's actually easy for most people. Although maybe working out and going to the gym isn't easy, it's the easiest thing that they can do to convince themselves that they are trying and attempting to make a change. When what we're going to talk about today, and it's a perfect segue, is that it's not that easy, and there's so much more to it. So let me take a step back and ask you this: when you hear and say connect with yourself, what the heck does that even mean? I mean, what comes top of mind of like, here's what connecting with yourself looks like, maybe what it feels like, what it sounds like what does it really actually mean?
I think it's going to look a little bit different for everybody, but the start point has got to be the same for everybody. You asked me this before we started recording, and what I keep coming up with day in and day out as my path to being able to create awareness. And we always, when we talk about any of these pillars, when we talk about developing any of these skills, the first piece is awareness, right? Mm-hmm. But to have awareness on the fact that something is a strength of yours or is a weakness of yours, something needs to be changed, something needs to be leveraged, something needs to be developed in your life or de-emphasized in your life. It's all about the openness and the willingness and the readiness for you to admit or be willing to think that it is a strength or a weakness. We all have personal bias. Movement for a lot of us, for myself, is something easy to fall back into. And when I feel poor or I feel bad or I have health concerns, the first thing I think about is I got to move more. I got to work out more. I got to work out better. That's my filter, because that's my personal bias. And a lot of people fall into that same thing. But where we're going wrong is that we are neglecting a lot of the other parameters, maybe the other six, one of or a few of the other 6 pillars that are probably the origin of it all. And even when we look at movement as an example, we like bench press, we don't like pull-ups. Why? When I say I like or dislike, when I gravitate more or less, it's because we're good at it, right? Or we're not good at it. So in life, as a person who naturally is not very an extrinsically driven person and is somebody that's not very social, I have a poor connection with other people. And that in myself, being able to be curious about that, being open and honest about that, is the first step to awareness.
And let me stop you there, because and we talked about this earlier, as you nail on the head, is I think we've both seen true change comes when you are willing and able to admit that maybe I don't know the answer.
Being open to the possibility.
That maybe there is a better way. Maybe there is another option. And then just being open to experimenting. And I think a lot of people say, well, I know I'm not always right, but do you live a life that shows that? Because it's easy to say those things, to say that, no, I'm not always right, but then how many of us say those things, that say we're open to these things, but then when some sort of experience or some sort of opportunity approaches us, we don't take it? Or how many of us have, within the last couple of weeks, tinkered with something that might be different than what we've done,
but didn't commit to it.
Right. And I know we talk, and sometimes can be a frustration of ours, but it's something that we've talked extensively about, is if you want to try something, if you feel like you need to try something, give it 2 weeks. Give it a week or 3 days. Right. But truly say, like, for those 3 to 4 to 5 days, I'm going to buy into the process of what it takes, so then I can truly go back and say, you know what, that didn't work for me in my life. And if you can truly say, like, I bought in and I gave it everything and I was submitted to that process, I feel like then you've done justice to the scientific approach, the scientific method. But I I think too often we're not willing to be open to those kind of things.
Well, the notion in how I grade myself, and I also am experiencing others, as we're in this scenario a lot, to where people are looking for new ways and expertise to develop an aspect of their life. So we get this interaction a lot. The way I can see whether or not a person is going to be immediately a potentially successful client is how many preconceived notions they actually have. How many preconceived solutions are they bringing us when they're meeting with us as the expert? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So in other words, in a first meeting or an assessment, or that interaction right off the bat, that somebody says, hey, I'm looking for a fitness program, here are my goals to do XXX, whatever, and here's what works for me, here's what I want from I want you guys to do for me. Not, I'm submitting, what do you think? These are the results that I want. How do you feel the best laid plan would be in my situation to actually get to that result? Preconceived notions are a lack of awareness or an openness and an ability to give yourself the opportunity to see another side, to see another view, to experiment with different ways to achieve the end result. Because by the very definition of you stepping into a parameter of getting help or trying to find a solution, you're admitting that you need help. You're admitting that you are looking for a change in that area, but there's still one more step to take, and that is ultimately getting rid of your preconceived notions or your conceptions, or therefore misconceptions, and submitting to somebody who you feel and you trust. Find a place you trust, person you trust. Find that trust in them is going to allow them to guide you into that portion.
So what do you do, or what have you done, or through your journey and story, to connect with yourself? Like, what are things that you maybe changed or you experimented with that you found to be or work for you?
Well, it comes from being honest with myself, and really exposing myself to.
So what? And I don't mean to stop you and chime in, but like, what does that mean? So you say be honest with yourself. What is that? What does that look like? Is that having a series of questions that you ask yourself? Is that spending some time alone where you can think about things? Like, what does being honest with yourself mean?
I think the first and best way to be able to find what being honest with yourself means to you in a specific scenario is putting yourself into vulnerable situations. Who is it? Brene Brown, who talks about vulnerability a lot. Check out her TED Talk if you haven't already. But vulnerability and the willingness to put yourself in vulnerable scenarios or put yourself in weak areas of your life is really putting yourself in a question of honesty of where do I stack up. And a lot of us are not willing to find out the results of where we do stack up. Whether it's something as off the beaten path as I'm going to take an IQ test, or I don't want to take that test because I know, and already having the preconceived notion of I don't take tests well. Well, that's already building up a wall and not being honest with yourself about where you do stack up, where your strengths and weaknesses are, and that may be a bad example. But really saying, you know what, I'm going to put myself into that position. I'm going to work out and do the things that I don't like to do historically, or I'm going to work on in environments that I'm not really comfortable in historically, because I want to find out truly the way I feel, the way I process, what my thoughts and typical patterns are, and I want to acknowledge those, and I want to be aware of those, and I want to appreciate those for good or bad, and then start to build awareness or build intelligence on that, so I can begin to understand where I need to make those changes. So the first piece of being honest with yourself is being open and being able to be willing to be vulnerable, to really get a clear picture of, well, shoot, man, like this is a strength of mine, this is a weakness of mine. I've got more weaknesses than what I really understood as something I conceived myself on previously, and then begin to shape, your process around that.
To almost be willing to make a mistake, and almost be willing to try something and then come back and say, you know what, maybe that didn't work. like I hoped? Or
The
thought
first
about?
step is willing. The second step, maybe far down the line, is appreciating the process to mistakes, appreciating the process in itself for what it is. Everybody talks about it's the journey, it's not the result, right? It's the path, it's not the outcome. All those things are good and great life lessons or adages, but ultimately it's very true that it really is the mindset, that the self-talk and the story that you tell yourself of how you're going through things has to be the appreciation and the concentration and the development of skill, that you're only going to reap results through that, not bypass that process by any way to get to results. Just because you walk into the gym doesn't make you lose weight, right? You have to understand that the process means that I have to show up consistently. The process means that I have to submit to my trainers and do what they tell me to, even though I may not like it. The process means that I have to put myself in positions that are going to be uncomfortable, that are going to be painful, that may not be, the most ideal music, the most ideal person, the most ideal putting myself into wearing things that I'm not comfortable with. We've got to be vulnerable for those things.
So what are some questions that you feel like you constantly go to, that you ask yourself on a daily basis to make sure you're continually auditing yourself and checking in and connecting with yourself? I mean, what are things, or maybe things that you even do that you're like, hey, I do these on a daily basis, and this helps me become aware of how I'm feeling and become aware of where my mindset is that day? Or maybe some questions that you constantly ask yourself when you want to try something new, or that you are trying or experimenting with something new?
That is a good question, and I emphasize that word question because that's what I do most often. When I am not curious, when I'm not asking questions, when I'm not seeking out people to talk to, or people to, I wouldn't say emulate, but be more of a voyeur on their path, picking up books and reading stories about the path and the journeys of people before me, talking to people.
So let's stop you there. What do you do with those books? So when you have a book, are you just reading to read, or how are you applying that and making that a part of?
Well, that goes into everything else. You've got to be curious about everything. You've got to take everything as a piece of a potential learning process. You've got to ask questions on everything that you do. Whether you're driving down the street and you are questioning, I literally just heard this being spoken yesterday when they talked about Leonardo da Vinci's biography just coming out. Leonardo da Vinci used to ask the questions of, why is the sky blue? Asking those questions and being curious. Ben Franklin did the same thing. Some of our greatest historical figures were very much the most curious people on earth. And that curiosity leads to not the questions that actually give them the answers, or the answers that give them the results, but the process of going about finding the answer that's truly the enlightening thing.
So if I'm hearing you right, I'm taking away two big things. It's being curious to finding a different way, or trying a different way. It's being willing. Well, I think the first step that I got from you is just being curious about things, of trying to look at things a little bit deeper, and not so much being okay with the status quo. And I don't think that's a line to say, well, we all got to be in self-help books or anything along those lines. I think it's just a thing to say, okay, maybe I got to be a little bit more curious about what I've been doing for the last decade of my life, and maybe just start to question, how is this working for me, and why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then my second piece that I took away from you, if I'm hearing you right, is then be willing to seek out other opportunities that might put us in different situations that I've been in the past year, week, months, because when I can finally put myself in a new environment, a new situation, a new opportunity, that's when I can reflect back on that I can be aware. So if I'm starting to just build three things from here, I'm hearing curiosity. Be willing to challenge and look deeper into what you do on a daily basis, and maybe say, that's not right, there's a better way. 2, be willing to ask for help. Be willing to be helpless, because we don't have the answers, nor should we have the answers, because we're not the expert in every field. But be willing to listen to what other people have to say, as long as we can create and there is a level of trust. And then 3, be willing to explore those and experiment with those, and then at the end reflect on those.
Yeah, I would. The only change I would make would be reversing the first 2. I would say be open and willing first, and then be curious. So, I think first we have to maintain the mentality that our conceptions are preconceived, are just that, they're preconceived, they're biased, they're our personal journey, but there's a million different ways out there, and possibly one of those ways, one of those perspectives may be a huge benefit or value for me. So that openness may be where people are stuck the most, or where they're stuck the longest.
And so you believe when people go through a simple process like that, of being open, trying, and experimenting, exploring, that they can ultimately connect better with who they are, and they can learn more about
100%.
where they've been, who they are, why they've created the perceptions and the preconceived
100%.
notions that they currently have.
Well, we are a product of our past, right? I'm 36 years old, so I'm a product of everything that's happened to me for 36 years. So that's what I know. The only things that I've experienced are what I know. And we have a tendency to fall into, I keep saying bias, but we have a tendency to fall into the patterns that we have learned along the way for our conscious effort, or that just happen to be circumstance, that really doesn't do us a very good service, And I think that everybody would agree that versatility is a great tool, is a great skill set, right? But there's only one way to be versatile or become versatile. Let's bring it back to the gym. And we know that versatility within movement patterns within the gym skill sets is why we just don't bench press. It's why we just don't squat. We push, we pull, we run, we jump, we roll, we crawl, to develop versatility, because our body can perform at its best levels and resist the most injuries when it becomes versatile, when it can call upon those skill sets. Same thing happens in life. Same thing happens from a personality perspective. We've got to expose ourselves to the notion that there is different perspectives out there, that there's different experiences out there, and that some of those can be of huge value for us to shape the future.
Give us an example in the last month, 2 months, 6 months, whatever it may be. Give us an example for you personally where you felt like you put yourself in a position to be vulnerable and had to really challenge what you've done previously, and you had to dig into yourself from there, and outside and from that you became more in tune and more aware of what's going on with you.
Well, first and foremost, I'd say the example that led to all of this is the example that I fall back to consistently and constantly, not just in story, but also for my own auditing, is that for 27, 28 years of my life, I felt that I was fully sufficient in myself, self-sufficient. I didn't believe that, and we'll talk about connection with others, a little later, maybe in the future episodes, but I didn't believe that I needed really, and it wasn't this perspective like I don't need anybody else, but more so like I felt that I was so already successful in my life and so apt in so many things that I was doing, that either I was already doing it well enough, better than everybody else when I compared myself to everybody else around me, and number 2, if it was to be learned and it was important enough, I can learn it and I can develop it on my own. Maybe with a manual, maybe with a book, maybe by listening to somebody or something, maybe by watching somebody or something, I can emulate that because I can learn quick and I can absorb and I can do anything. But there were so many things in my life that were falling so far short of what was a minimal standard that I was just not aware of just how low I was going, and just down what path I was actually walking down that was leading me to a bad situation. Putting myself in a vulnerable standpoint, I'd say within the past year and a half, speaking outwardly about my health issues, or speaking outwardly about my relationship with myself. I think that is in itself the most vulnerable we can be able to put ourselves in. When you hear people do inspirational talks, when they stand up in front of crowds of hundreds or thousands and they talk about their struggle with drugs or alcohol, their struggle with eating disorders, their struggle with mental health, their struggle with physical disabilities, or whatever the case may be, they didn't always have that ability to talk about that. That is them being vulnerable and them exposing themselves to the masses of what we preconceive as a notion of judgment or a notion of criticism or whatever the case may be, when in fact it's only when we're comfortable with ourselves, when we start to explore ourselves and we start to become curious with ourselves, that we want to tell that story. Not that I want to go out to the world and tell that story, but I'm open and willing to tell people outside of myself that story, because you know what it does? It allows me to reflect even more back on myself. I struggled with, drinking too much. I struggled with managing my own stress, and I wasn't an alcoholic, but what that was doing for me, that wasn't being able to connect with myself. That was using external means, exercise. I would dive deep into reading things, that were making me escape from what reality is on myself, to being able to really truly dive deeper into knowing myself, but also fixing, what was unhealthy about the whole process, and therefore being happier about that process. I have no problems talking about it because I struggle with it all the time, but because I'm on a path that I feel like I'm on a path that the process and the journey really is the skill set in itself, and that is worth telling other people, to encourage them to really find what their path needs to look like and how they need to actually go about it. So,
well, I think that's awesome, John. I appreciate you sharing. I think take homes for me. Just be willing to ask questions. Be willing to ask for help. Be willing to use people around you to figure out and learn about you. I mean, it's pretty clear from just listening to you that A, it's something you're passionate about. I think we all are here, but B, that you've learned and had time to reflect on where you're at, and you had a chance to understand that maybe, just maybe, you weren't as sufficient on your own as a tribe or an army can allow you to be, and that you are, as we all are, continually kind of learning along this process. And I don't think what we say here is by any means the be-all, end-all, because I know we don't know anything. I shouldn't say we don't know everything either. We're all kind of going through this together. But at the end of the day, just be willing to experiment and try and ask questions that maybe you and we all have been putting off for so long.
Yeah, have a beginner's mindset. Be open and willing to other possibilities. Be curious and question everything, not to be a contrarian and question everything rudely, but question everything by way of it's a great opportunity to learn something about yourself and everything else. And number 4, that connection, that curiosity leading to submitting to how other experiences can actually teach you things is a great recipe for success, I think.
For sure. Awesome. Hey, have a great day, everyone. We will see you guys all next week.